You remember what it felt like to hold an Atari 2600 joystick for the first time, or to watch your dad set up the Sony beta movie at Thanksgiving, convinced he was filming history. He was, just not the kind that gets preserved. Today, 15 famous products from the 1980s that failed, flopped, and quietly disappeared while America moved on. A $2 billion company brought down by one video game. A laptop that weighed 16 pounds. A smokeless cigarette nobody would smoke twice. And a frozen lasagna that tasted exactly like what it said on the box, which was the problem. 15 products, 15 disasters. Let's get into it. Number 15, the Atari 2600, and the story of how one video game caused an industry to collapse so completely that nobody believed video games could ever be a real business again. The Atari 2600 launched in 1977, and for a few years was the greatest thing in American living rooms. Pong, Pac-Man, Space Invaders, every kid in America either had an Atari or knew someone who did. Atari was not just a game console, it was the game console. The thing that invented the concept of bringing the arcade home. At peak, Atari was the fastest growing company in American history. $2 billion in sales in 1980 alone. The Atari 2600 was sitting in 25% of American homes. Then Atari decided to port E.T. the Extraterrestrial to the 2600. The game was developed in 5.5 weeks. The result was widely considered the worst video game ever made. Controls that made no sense, pits that trapped the player with no logical way out. Atari had manufactured 12 million cartridges. They sold approximately 1.5 million. The remaining cartridges, millions of them, were buried in a New Mexico landfill in 1983. The 2600 didn't disappear because it was bad. It disappeared because one terrible game broke everyone's trust simultaneously. That's not a hardware problem, that's a relationship problem. And Atari never got that relationship back. Subscribe, because number 1 involves a company that decided its brand needed a frozen lasagna. That's where this list ends. Alright, moving on. Number 14, Sony Beta Movie Recorder, 1983, and the video camera that parents everywhere bought to record their children's birthday parties, recitals, and vacations before the format it used became completely obsolete within 5 years. Sony had been fighting the VHS versus Betamax format war throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s. Betamax was widely considered the technically superior format. Better picture quality, better sound, better build. The camera itself was genuinely innovative. Parents could film their kids' school plays and play them back directly through their Betamax VCR. The problem was that VHS was winning the format war. Store shelves were slowly cutting Betamax. Rental stores were stocking fewer Betamax titles. Man. By 1988, Sony officially conceded the format war. The Beta movie and all its Betamax descendants became orphaned technology. Cameras and tapes that worked perfectly but played on machines increasingly impossible to find. Somewhere in attics across America, there are Betamax cassettes containing irreplaceable family footage that nobody can play because the machines needed to play them stopped being sold 40 years ago. Number 13, the DeLorean DMC-12, January 1981, and the car that came with gull-wing doors, a stainless steel body, and a company founder who was later arrested at an FBI sting operation trying to fund his business by selling cocaine. John DeLorean was the golden boy of American automotive engineering. He had designed the Pontiac GTO, helped launch the Pontiac Firebird. The DMC-12 was his vision. Brushed stainless steel exterior, gull-wing doors that swung up instead of out, and a body that was unmistakably futuristic. The problem started immediately. The V6 engine produced only 130 horsepower, which made the car slower than it looked. In 1982, John DeLorean was arrested in a hotel room after an FBI sting operation. He was eventually acquitted, but the company had already collapsed. Approximately 9,000 DMC-12s were built before production stopped. And then Marty McFly drove one in Back to the Future in 1985. And suddenly, a failed car from a failed company became one of the most recognizable automobiles in American history. The DeLorean didn't succeed as a car. It succeeded as a time machine, which is technically a different product category. Number 12, McDonald's McDLT, 1984, and the hamburger that solved a problem nobody had asked McDonald's to solve, at the cost of enough styrofoam to concern an environmentalist from space. McDonald's had noticed noticed that customers sometimes complained that the hot beef patty was making the cold lettuce and tomato wilt. The solution, the McDLT, was a two-sided styrofoam container that kept the hot half hot and the cold half cold. Jason Alexander, years before Seinfeld, starred in a commercial dancing with backup performers while enthusiastically proclaiming the virtues of keeping the hot side hot and the cool side cool. The problems were also genuine. The packaging required enormous amounts of expanded polystyrene foam. Environmental pressure was mounting against fast food packaging. McDonald's discontinued the McDLT in 1991 as they began switching to paper-based packaging. The problem it solved was real. The solution was just made of the wrong material for the era it landed in. Number 11. The RCA CED video disc system, 1981. An RCA's 12-year, $600 million bet that the future of home video was a stylus reading grooves pressed into a vinyl disc, a format that was obsolete before it launched. RCA began developing CED technology in 1969. The development took 12 years and cost more than $600 million. The discs could not record. They were playback only, which eliminated the enormous time-shifting market that was driving VCR adoption. RCA discontinued CED production in 1984, just 4 years after launch. Whoa, $600 million, 12 years of development, 4 years in market. The product was technically clever, economically catastrophic, and historically memorable only as a lesson in backing the wrong horse for 12 years. Number 10. The IBM PCjr, 1983, and the personal computer that IBM built specifically for American families, and that American families returned in such large numbers that it became a case study in how to misunderstand your customer. IBM had dominated the business personal computer market since 1981. The PCjr was their attempt to bring the IBM brand into the home. Priced at around $1,200 at launch, the PCjr was almost immediately recognized as a poorly designed product. The keyboard was widely mocked. Small, chiclet-style keys that felt like typing on a calculator bought at a gas station. Software compatibility with the standard IBM PC was limited, and the $1,200 price tag, advertised as affordable, was genuinely painful for American families. IBM released a redesigned keyboard as a free upgrade to early adopters, which was simultaneously an admission of failure and a customer service gesture. The PCjr was discontinued in 1985 after less than 2 years. IBM, which had invented the personal computer standard, had managed to make a computer that felt less professional than a toy. That required genuine effort. Number 9. The Kodak disc camera, 1982, and the camera that Kodak spent years developing to replace the 110 cartridge format, only to find that the smaller negative it used produced photographs too blurry to satisfy customers who had been getting crisper pictures from the format it was supposed to replace. The designs were genuinely slim and pocketable. Kodak positioned the disc format as the modern, convenient answer to point-and-shoot photography. The fundamental problem was physics. The smaller disc negative produced pictures that, when enlarged to standard print sizes, were noticeably less sharp. Man. If you grew up in the 1980s, you have a specific album of soft, slightly out-of-focus photographs from family vacations and birthday parties taken with a disc camera. Kodak discontinued the disc format in 1988. The camera designed to be the future of convenient photography produced pictures that made the past look sharper. Number 8. Pepsi AM, 1989. And the cola that Pepsi introduced for the morning market, because apparently someone at Pepsi headquarters believed Americans wanted to drink Pepsi at 7 in the morning instead of coffee. The reasoning was not insane. Caffeine is caffeine. Cola contains caffeine. Coffee contains caffeine. If Americans drink caffeine for breakfast and Americans drink cola throughout the day, why shouldn't Americans drink cola for breakfast? Americans did not adopt Pepsi AM as a morning alternative to coffee. Americans continued drinking coffee in the morning. Some of them also drank Pepsi later in the day. But the gap between those two behaviors proved structural rather than habitual. Pepsi AM also had to compete with a deeply embedded cultural ritual. Coffee in the morning is warmth, aroma, routine, and something you can hold between your hands while staring out a window and reconsidering your life choices. Pepsi AM offered none of these things. It was discontinued within a year. Number 7. The Apple Newton Message Pad, 1987 through 1993, and the personal digital assistant that was technically ahead of its time in every way except the one that mattered most. The Newton was Apple's attempt to create a new category of handheld computing. No keyboard. A touch-sensitive screen you wrote on with a stylus. software that was supposed to read your handwriting and convert it to text. The handwriting recognition was the product's defining feature, and its defining flaw. The satirical comic strip Doonesbury devoted multiple strips to mocking Newton's handwriting failures. Egg freckles, the Newton's famous misinterpretation of catching on, became a cultural reference point. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997 and killed the Newton line in 1998, he was eliminating a product that had genuinely pioneered concepts that would appear a decade later in the iPhone. Touchscreen computing, handwriting input, a pocket-sized device for managing your life. The Newton was right about almost everything except the engineering it would take to make those ideas work. Number 6. The Coleco Adam computer, 1983. And the home computer bundled with a daisy wheel printer and a word processor that was supposed to make the Coleco Adam the only computer a family would ever need, until units started arriving from the factory with their memory erased. The bundling strategy was genuinely clever. Coleco sold a complete home computing system for $625. Everything a family needed. The manufacturing problems were immediate and catastrophic. The Adam's daisy wheel printer generated an electromagnetic pulse when it started up that was strong enough to erase the contents of nearby digital storage. Units were arriving to customers with memory already erased from the journey between the factory and the store. The printer that was supposed to be the Adam's competitive advantage was literally destroying its own product. That's a hardware interaction problem for which there is no good marketing solution. Coleco discontinued the Adam in 1985. Number 5. The Macintosh Portable, 1989. And Apple's first true laptop computer. A machine that was technically impressive, professionally priced, and heavy enough to be used as a weapon if the need arose. The Macintosh Portable was a genuine engineering achievement. It ran actual Macintosh software. It had an active matrix LCD screen that was genuinely sharp by the standards of 1989. The battery life was exceptional. Apple claimed up to 12 hours. It weighed 7.2 kilograms. That is 15.9 pounds. Business travelers who bought the Macintosh Portable and attempted to use it on airplanes discovered that fitting it on a tray table required geometry and a willingness to impose on the passenger in front of you. Whoa. The price was $6,500 at launch. For $6,500 in 1989, you could buy a used car, a year of college tuition at many universities, or a laptop that would give you upper back problems before you reached your destination. Apple discontinued the Macintosh Portable in 1991. The PowerBook 100 that replaced it weighed 5.5 pounds. That's not a successor, that's an apology. Number 4. R.J. Reynolds Premier cigarettes, 1988. And the smokeless cigarette that the tobacco industry invented specifically to avoid the growing public health concerns about secondhand smoke, and that tasted, according to reviewers, like something between a burning tire and a chemical processing facility. By the late 1980s, the tobacco industry was facing mounting pressure over secondhand smoke. R.J. Reynolds' answer was the Premier, a cigarette-shaped device that heated tobacco rather than burning it. No ash, minimal secondhand smoke. The taste was the insurmountable problem. Consumer testing described the Premier as tasting like burning rubber, stale chemicals, and a variety of other unpleasant things that tobacco was not supposed to taste like. R.J. Reynolds pulled the Premier from test markets in 1989 after less than a year. They had spent an estimated $325 million developing a product that their own customers refused to smoke twice. $325 million for a product that failed its own taste test. Number 3. The Next Computer, 1988. And the workstation that Steve Jobs built after Apple's board forced him out, a machine that was genuinely beautiful, genuinely powerful, and priced in a way that ensured almost nobody could actually buy one. After leaving Apple, Steve Jobs founded Next Incorporated. The Next Computer was the result, a perfect cube of magnesium alloy. The Next Step operating system was object-oriented, multitasking, and represented computing architecture that competitors wouldn't match for years. The price was $6,500 for the base model. Mainstream consumers were not buying $6,000 workstations regardless of how elegant the magnesium cube looked sitting on their desk. When Apple acquired Next in 1997 for $429 million, they were acquiring the Next Step operating system that would become the foundation of Mac OS X, which became the foundation of iOS, which became the foundation of the iPhone. The Next computer failed commercially. The software inside it runs on billions of devices today. Number 2. New Coke. April 23, 1985. And the day that the Coca-Cola Company decided that the formula it had been using since 1886, the formula that had made Coca-Cola the most recognizable brand on earth, needed to be changed. Coca-Cola had been losing market share to Pepsi throughout the early 1980s. Company research showed that in blind tests, the sweeter formulation won, so Coca-Cola reformulated. On April 23, 1985, they announced that the 99-year-old formula was being replaced by New Coke. The public response was immediate, massive, and furious. Phone calls to the company ran at 8,000 per day. Letters arrived by the tens of thousands, including one addressed to the CEO that opened, "Dear Chief Dodo." On July 10, 1985, less than 3 months after the launch, Coca-Cola announced the return of the original formula as Coca-Cola Classic. The company called it a marketing mistake. Marketing historians called it possibly the most expensive consumer research lesson in history. And conspiracy theorists suggested it was a deliberate strategy to relaunch Classic Coke with renewed enthusiasm. It was probably just a mistake. Number 1. And number 1, Colgate Frozen Lasagna, 1982. And the moment when the company that had spent a century building one of the most trusted brand names in American households decided that trust should extend to the frozen food aisle. Colgate-Palmolive has been making toothpaste since 1873. When Americans brush their teeth, most of them, most mornings, there is a meaningful chance they are using a Colgate product. The Colgate brand is associated, permanently and non-negotiably, with clean teeth, fresh breath, and the inside of a bathroom. In 1982, someone at Colgate-Palmolive decided this brand equity could be extended to frozen entrees. They did not. Frozen Colgate lasagna sat in grocery store freezer sections while shoppers experienced a specific kind of psychological confusion. The same mental association that makes it difficult to eat food at a dentist's office, or to drink anything that comes in a package that resembles cleaning supplies. The Colgate brand meant one thing, and only one thing to American consumers. It meant toothpaste. And you do not want your lasagna tasting like toothpaste. The Colgate Kitchen Entrees line was discontinued rapidly after its regional test market showed almost no consumer adoption. Somewhere out there, a marketing plan for Colgate Frozen Lasagna was once written, reviewed, approved, funded, manufactured, and distributed. Every single person in that chain was wrong. And somehow, the lasagna is more famous now, 40 years later, than it ever was when you could actually buy it. So there you have it, 15 famous products from the 1980s that failed and disappeared. From Atari's ET cartridge buried in a New Mexico desert to New Coke's 79 days of existence before a national revolt. From a laptop that weighed 16 pounds to a cigarette that tasted like burning chemicals. From a computer whose printer erased its own data to a car that only became famous after a time machine made it iconic. The 1980s were not short on ambition. They were sometimes short on execution, and occasionally short on the basic understanding that your toothpaste brand probably shouldn't be selling you dinner. Which one of these do you actually remember? And do you have the receipts to prove it? Drop it below.